Hey everybody, welcome to Dead Reckoning TV, a very special edition in the midst of this holiday season. We're talking with Brian Godawa. As you probably know, the movie Exodus came out. And of course, we had Brian and Brian. They kind of went gangbusters when you guys talked about Noah. So we thought, well, Exodus is obviously the next logical choice, from Noah to Moses. Next is going to be King David, and then we're going to have something again on Jesus, and it's all going to be terrible.
No, really. They're not doing David, are they?
Yes.
Are they really?
We'll talk about that.
Oh, man. Okay, so, but first we do have Hollywood screenwriter, author Brian Godawa on the show with us. We're going to talk about the movie Exodus. And what I wanted to kind of focus on, because we have, like, Time Magazine is talking about why it's unbiblical. We all kind of, everybody's kind of talking about why this movie's unbiblical. We all know that it's unbiblical, but nobody's really talking about why this even matters. And Brian, you really, I mean, you're the Hollywood worldview guy. Give us some context. Before we start talking about the film and some of its messaging, give us a little bit of context as to why even thinking about this stuff from why it's important for us to actually be thinking about this stuff from a biblical perspective.
Sure. I think the biggest mistake is for anybody, whether Christian or not, to just look at the movie and say, "Oh, here's where it doesn't follow the Bible in this detail and that detail and this detail and that detail." That's a stupid way of approaching it, because quite frankly, in order to make a movie is a different medium than a written story, than a literary story. So you've got to make a lot of changes. The important thing to understand is what are the details servicing? What is the meaning and the significance of the story? And the way that you understand that is by knowing how storytelling embodies or incarnates worldviews. And if you have a little bit of understanding what worldviews are, which unfortunately many people don't, it helps you to be able to spot them in the movie. And so that's why I think that really the most important thing that needs to be talked about in whether it's Exodus or any movie is really, what is the meaning? What are they actually pointing everything towards? Because as a Christian, I myself have written biblical novels, and I weave in fantasy and I change things. I leave a lot of things out from the Bible because I have to write my story, etc. But I'm still servicing the original intent. I'm attempting to service the original intent of the literary work.
Do worldviews, as you say, spot the worldviews in movies? Do worldviews, in your estimation, Brian, do they affect people? I mean, it's one thing to say, I mean, this is another way of getting at the question of, does it really matter? Is it important to spot a director or a writer's worldview if at the end of the day it doesn't matter and nobody's really taking a worldview away from a movie?
All right, that's one of the biggest misnomers that I write about in my book, Hollywood Worldviews, where I'm trying to help particularly Christians to be able to watch movies with wisdom and discernment. And one of the biggest misnomers is there's two extremes that I see a lot. That is the cultural anorexics and the cultural gluttons. The cultural anorexics are, of course, sort of the fundamentalists of the olden days, and the prudish Christians, etc., who can't expose themselves to any kind of sin depicted in movies because they think it's evil or bad, and so they don't see anything. They throw it all out. Baby with the bathwater, right? But then you've got the other extreme, which is the cultural gluttons, and those are the ones that say, "Hey, it's just entertainment." And these aren't just Christians; these are many people. They'll watch and they'll just think it's just entertainment. It's just a good story. Can't you just appreciate it? Those people are the most easily manipulated of all, because I can assure you, as a professional storyteller who's worked for many years writing stories and telling stories, storytelling is all about communicating our worldview, our values to you, the viewer or the reader, or whatever format the story is being consumed in. And in this case, we're talking about movies. So yes, all movies carry a worldview, and those who are most easily manipulated are those who are not aware of what is going on. So the more that you can consciously observe it and discern that, the more you can, well, quite frankly, spot what's bad and what's good. And I think it also makes you more capable of eating the watermelon and spitting out the seeds, if I may, where you can discern the good from the bad and not be as influenced by the bad. But if you don't know what's going on, you're going to be taken in by the story as you follow the sympathetic hero. You follow his journey. You support him. You cheer him on, and then of course the whole point of a hero's journey is literally to convert the hero, and because you are sympathetically supporting him, right?
Sure.
Because you are emotionally engaging with the hero, you will also have that conversion, whether it's emotional or intellectual. It's primarily emotional. You'll experience the same conversion by the end of the story that the hero experiences. And because it's emotional, you may not be aware of it intellectually, but it's still a legitimate change that has happened upon you. And I think this is why the power of television, which is actually more than movies, to shape cultural values. You know, I mean, look at all the moral issues we're struggling with today. It's because we've had many years of television and movies numbing us to these values.
Sure. Okay, so that's a perfect segue into Exodus, because I sat there and I came away with one thought. As Brian has said in his blog post, which we'll link both blog posts to both Brian Godawa's and Brian Mattson's in the show notes, as well as my wife's. I thought hers was really good too, but I'm a fan. I'm biased. I walked away from the movie. There wasn't a hero in Exodus. I walked away from it going, okay, there is definitely one villain. I did not like God. Okay, I felt very sympathetic towards Pharaoh, but I can't root for Pharaoh because he's kind of a dick, frankly. And I can't really root for Moses because he's kind of doing what this God I really don't like in the movie is doing as well. Now, what you're saying is that was intentional by Ridley Scott, because I'm kind of looking at this going, okay, Ridley just made a movie. I know he's an atheist. I like every single movie Ridley Scott has ever done except Exodus. He's making these movies, and I'm thinking, okay,
You liked Prometheus?
I did. I found it enjoyable. We can't.
Somebody needs to read Hollywood Worldviews by Brian Godawa.
I look at these very discerningly, and we're not talking about Prometheus right now. We're talking about Exodus.
Continue with your point.
So what you're saying is Ridley did this intentionally. He didn't do just to make. He's a big time director. He's like, I can make some money hitting the evangelical subculture. He did this intentionally, is what you're saying?
He's not interested in just making pulpy garbage that he can make money and go home on. Ridley Scott wants to make movies with significance or meaning, and he cannot help but filter that storyline through his worldview. Now, keep in mind, when we say him, we're really talking about him and the writers, who are also atheists.
Obviously. Yeah.
And because the writers do put a lot into the story, but they're working with the director, and yes, they're deliberately communicating their views. So therefore, so then the next question you will ask is, okay, but they told a story about God and Moses. So if they're
it's terrible.
atheists,
That's
how
not
can
that's not the question I'm going to ask. That's a question a lot of people will ask, but it goes back to your cultural glutton thing.
And it gets to the nature of subversion, and that is the most powerful form of storytelling, and we all do it, and I assure you, I do it as well. All good storytellers subvert cultural values or worldviews. What that is they take images, notions, or stories that are well-known memes of a culture, right? They use those stories and then they retell the story, but they embed it, spin it. We're familiar with the concept of spin, right? So they're spinning the story to their own, redefining terms in their own worldview, and then that's how they pull people in, suck them in, and deceive them. And like I say, a lot of storytelling does this. In fact, I got to tell you, the Bible subverts a lot of pagan story elements as well.
Actually, it's in truth, the Exodus story in the Bible is a subversive story. I mean, he actually got it. The subtitle of that movie is Gods and Kings. And that story is a story of the clash between Yahweh and Egypt's gods. Those plagues are not just willy-nilly randomly chosen. Each one of those is a direct confrontation with God and the Egyptian nature gods, and God wins. Okay, so even that's a subversive story in its way.
Sure. And in the Bible, God says, I will deliver you with my right arm, with my strong right arm. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Pharaoh used to always say. My strong right arm is an aspect of my deity. So God is using that and mocking Pharaoh. And there's even scholarship that indicates that while the plagues don't necessarily, they're not all specifically centered on specific deities. They are related to the deities. And there's a scripture that indicates that the plagues are God judging the gods of Egypt. So yeah, you're right.
Well, that makes sense.
Going on all the time.
There's so much about Old Testaments that gets thrown out because people don't have an understanding of the overall arc of Scripture. That the Old Testament is built around God proving himself to be king. He's doing the same thing today. He's like, we are the creation, we are not the creator. And I get really tired of people saying, oh, well, because this is a common question that, okay, well, I can't worship. It happened to me at the bar the other night. She looks at me and goes, she's the niece of a local pastor. She goes, I can't worship a God that wiped out everybody, all those people in the Old Testament. There's whole scriptures that talk about, and I understand that that's a legitimate frustration, we don't want that to happen to people. But I mean, even in the Old Testament, God wiped out entire families, entire people. But his point was, I am not a vindictive little punk like the God of Exodus. Is it, Brian?
Oh, is it, Brian? He says that, and then he throws me the question.
Oh, yes, you're the theologian.
Was a real great
theologian.
No, God is not a vindictive little punk. Isn't it interesting that in the story of Exodus, there are 10 plagues, and in between every one of those plagues, there is Moses going to Pharaoh as an emissary and saying, let my people go. In Ridley Scott's version of the film, that never happens. There's no warning given. There's no indication that God will relent if Pharaoh repents and changes his mind. So in Ridley Scott's version of the story, after God has killed the firstborn son of everybody in Egypt, including Pharaoh, and Pharaoh stands and says, what kind of a God would do this? Pharaoh's a pretty sympathetic party, because you didn't get the 10 times where Pharaoh very reasonably could have repented, instead hardening his heart. Okay, so the narrative of Scripture gives a picture of a God who is slow to anger, which is exactly how he reveals himself to Moses. Yahweh, Yahweh, the gracious and compassionate God, who is slow to anger and abounding in love. And that's embedded right there in the Exodus 34. It's embedded right there in the story. None of that makes it into Ridley Scott's film.
Well, not only that, but none of the other, well, you kind of mentioned this, but I mean, the idea that God in the Old Testament, God is a God who makes promises.
Sure.
He expresses love. Yes, there's anger against sin, but it's important to understand that this choice of making God out to be in the image of a young, impetuous, vindictive little spoiled brat who has temper tantrums, right? I think the point behind that, many people might say, oh, well, but it's a unique creative choice. You wouldn't have thought of that, etc. No, I think it's clear that this is Ridley Scott's belief about what the God of the Old Testament really is, because it mirrors the village atheists of today, Richard Dawkins and on and on. It mirrors what they claim, which is God is a childish little old vengeful tribal deity, etc. Right? So I think that he's really just embodying Yahweh in the form that he sees. But there's another element that I think is important to understand, and that is there's one level in which, look, Scott's an atheist. He has no concept of what it means to know God, to love God, to have a relationship with him. So it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't understand that, and therefore he creates a God that has no relationship. He's cold, distant. Moses is cold, distant, alienating. There's no concept of a communion between the two, because he doesn't believe it exists. So to him, he has to reduce God to something that he can understand. So what he does is he makes God into more of a vision. The first time Noah.
Yeah, right.
It's really almost the same thing.
It is the same story, actually.
Yeah, it's the same story. Because when does Moses first see God? He gets bumped on the head in a mudslide, and it looks like a vision, right?
Sure.
And look, I have no problem with having God in visions and dreams, but that's all he appears, and nobody else sees him, and only Moses sees him. And there's a point made that it sort of looks like he's talking to nothing, right? When Joshua looks, he sees that Moses is talking to nothing.
It makes him look kind of crazy.
He's talking to it's a figment of his imagination, right?
Exactly. And I was too nice on my original movie review on my blog, but you know, and that was, I said, it's not as bad as Noah, because it isn't, because Moses isn't quite as bad of a madman, but I would change that now to say that, no, really, if you watch the movie, Moses does become a kind of madman, just not as insane as Noah was, but as the story progresses, you see he gets more ragged, more madman looking, right? And never is there a certainty in him that he's actually interacting with God. He doesn't even know if the Red Sea is going to part, right? He doesn't know anything. And everything's a surprise to him. And while on the one hand, yeah, God surprises us, but the big picture of this entire story is this is a God that is more akin to religious experience and visions, not reality, cold, distant, alienating, hateful, vengeful, and really, you don't know that he really exists. And as Scott himself has said, he doesn't believe in the miracles, so he tried to naturalize them, give natural explanations for all of them.
I didn't even get my parting of the Red Sea. I didn't get my towering walls.
I wanted to follow up with something you just said, and you anticipated it there, Brian. You said his portrayal of God is based on what Ridley Scott believes. All right, and I wanted to piggyback on that because he has said, I did not part the Red Sea, because I don't believe the Red Sea parted. And you didn't have walls of water on two sides because I don't believe it happened. And if I don't believe it happened, it's not going to be in my movie. Now, isn't that interesting? If we just apply that philosophy to the portrayal of God, well, voila, there it is. God is the figment of a crazed madman and a pretty vindictive, spoiled little brat at that.
Well, quite frankly, this is where, you know, in a Freudian sense, so to speak, I think it's very clear that for humanists and atheists, if they're going to retell these myths of their gods, it's going to be a projection of themselves, because really that's, you know, in a godless worldview, they are their own gods. And so I think that it's really more an autobiographical reflection of the filmmakers. Their picture of God is really more autobiographical of themselves, their own anger, and they're at the raging at the universe or at God than it is of anything else.
Yeah, I wanted to run this one by you, Brian. I struggle with, obviously Moses is a better film, or Exodus is a better film than Noah. Okay,
far more visually interesting.
Just in terms of
character development, way better.
Just everything about it, cinematography, sets, costuming. It was just a far superior movie. But there's a sense in which I don't know that this. I almost think Exodus is worse. God isn't in the movie Noah. Everything is left to kind of your interpretation, right? There's subtlety, like you have to read into that movie in a sense, this negative understanding of God. God actually shows up in Exodus, and the picture painted is absolutely awful. I cannot believe I've read several reviews by evangelical Christians who, well, you know, it was interesting. And I'm sitting here thinking, that was about the ugliest portrayal.
It's overt.
Of your deity that you could see. It's so overt. And so in my book, it's almost Exodus is a worse movie than Noah.
I would have to agree with you wholeheartedly. And you know, this is where I think that you know, Christians who are trying to be, you know, cool or culturally relevant or accepted by the world or whatever, you know, they're intent on justifying these choices with, you know, things like, oh well, you know, hey, you know, it's unique, it's creative, we didn't think of it, like, you know, whether it's the tidal wave instead of the splitting, or, you know, like I said, portraying God as a child. Technically, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but when you put all these elements together, it's not the little pieces, like we said in the very beginning, it's not the little pieces, it's what they all mean and what they're servicing. And the big problem today is we're in a postmodern generation with postmodern Christians who just say, well, you know, I don't care whatever Ridley Scott was. I believe Moses, and so I just project what I think is there, and they have no respect for the authors, right. Which is a dangerous thing for their approach to God in the Bible as well. But so there's a rejection of the authors, and I think that we're living in that right now. You know, and that's why we're concerned about, hey, do we know something about the filmmakers? Do we know what they're saying? Do we know what they believe? Well, we do, and that should help inform us understanding the interpretation that's coming across so that we can more consciously be aware of it. And in that sense, we can appreciate it more if it's good or discern it if it's bad.
Brian, this is a bleak picture, man. we got you. You're an active. I mean, you've been on feature films. You're on television. You're an active, like, working writer, and yet you don't have any influence on movies like this. Is there? It's kind of a bleak picture for Hollywood if we've got these types of people making. I'm almost convinced now that I am just not going to like anything that Hollywood will ever produce on the Bible because they're not going to get it right, and with a few subtle tweaks here and there. But does that mean we shouldn't get involved, or we shouldn't? I mean, I don't know that boycotting is the answer, but I mean, how do we have an impact from your perspective? You're working in the industry, you're working with these people. What can we do? I mean, is this just something we just throw up our hands and go, it's a lost cause?
Yeah, I don't, I wouldn't say boycott. I'm not into boycotting. I would just say, just don't go to the movie because it's bad.
As I told somebody the other day, they're like, hey, what'd you think of Exodus? I'm like, there's a lot of options this weekend at the movie theater.
Yeah.
Well, I think I said in my review, I said, go ahead, go. There's actually, this movie has some things to be said for it. Go ahead and go. Just know that you're just going to continue subsidizing this kind of approach.
Bottom line, you guys, is that's right. Whatever you put your money to, Hollywood would give you more of. And Brian said that in his blog very brilliantly. And bottom line is that's true. So really, I would recommend not going and seeing things that are not supportive of review. And it's sad for me because on the other hand, I know that there are other movies that are getting out there, and I'm not going to name them because I think that they're made by Christians, and even some biblical ones. But they're just not that good a quality. But I still believe in trying to go to see those movies and support them and watch them, because if the box office grows, then the filmmakers will be able to make more movies and they'll get better. Because quite honestly, even though I agree, 95% of the Christian movies out there now are such terrible quality that I can't, in good integrity, I could never work on them myself. But nevertheless, I still watch some of them. I try to see some of them. I don't see a lot, but I believe that if you look back even 5 years ago, the quality of Christian films really were 3 times worse, and they are getting better. So in general, try to support those Christian movies, even if you don't like it. Stop ragging on them and praising, the Hollywood garbage. To me, the Ridley Scott said that his next film, one of the next films he wants to make, is about King David. Well, I've got a new novel out. Shameless self-promotion.
Please do. Shamelessly promote, Brian.
I've got a new novel out on David Ascendant. So in the course of writing a story about David as well, in the course of writing that, I did research and I read up all the liberal scholarship, which is, of course, where Hollywood was going to get their ideas. Because, Christian Bale said he read David Kirsch's book on Moses, which completely even suggests Moses didn't exist, right? So he doesn't believe in Moses either. And but I know the scholarship on King David, and basically what it believes is, if David did exist, which he probably didn't, if he did exist, he was actually a serial killer and a terrorist, and he literally did everything the opposite of what the Bible says, because it's just trying to justify him taking power and becoming king.
Wow.
So God only knows. God only knows what the movie's going to be like. And I'm like, please don't make a David movie unless you can get a Christian director to make it.
They will. They will.
Yeah, but see, the Bible tells us that Christians are going to be hated by the world. I mean, it's specifically mentioned.
Right. I wanted to follow up that point. Look,
okay, go ahead.
I appreciate very much your point, Brian, about there is sort of among a lot of Christians sort of a subculture of let's bash other Christians' attempts to make art and movies. And truthful though it may be that a lot of it is bad art and these are bad movies, it's a really good word to say, you know what, if you never support this effort, it won't get better. So I appreciate that. #1 best-selling R-rated movie of all time was
The Passion of the Christ.
The Passion of the Christ. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson played the story straight. He told the story. He basically went through the narrative, and he told it straight. Problem is, your Hollywood directors and writers can't bring themselves to play it straight. And the reason is, for what the reason is exactly what Jay just said. They can't bring themselves to play it straight. There is an animosity to the Bible, to the religious traditions that the Bible has inspired, isn't there, Brian?
Well, look, Ridley Scott said, and I got a quote on, if it's not in my blog, it's going to be in an article coming out soon. He said, the biggest cause of evil in the world is, of course, religion. So, my gosh, so you want this guy to make the movie of a religious movie?
Well, let me ask you.
No, wait. What I'm saying is, what I'm complaining about is studios. In other words, look, this is a free world. You can make any movie you want and spin anything you want. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're saying is studios are always talking about how they want to make a lot of money, and money's the bottom line, and they want to please the audience so that they can make a lot of money. Well, if they want to please the audience, why are they making a God hater make a movie for Christians and Jews and Muslims, and the guy hates God? I mean, you don't want to make money if that's what you're doing, or you're pretty stupid.
That's a good point.
Or they share his animosity, and they just they know they're going to make their couple $100 million, and they're okay with that. You know, but
bingo.
Yeah, so wow,
Brian, I think we're out of time. I hate to say that.
It's such a fun conversation.
I know. Should we have a part 2?
No, we don't have to. I mean, we'll just continue. We'll
continue bringing on. Well, we can when they come out with King David will have him on. And
I want Brian before we close out though. Brian, I noticed that over your right shoulder is a really cool looking poster, and it says "Chronicles of the Nephilim." Can you tell us and our viewers what that is and where they can obtain these Chronicles of the Nephilim? I understand they're actually on sale right now for the next few days for Christmas.
Ooh.
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, only until the 20th, but you have to, it's at a special faithlauncher.com. Faithlauncher.com. You can get like major discounts for the next few days until December 20th. But basically, Chronicles of the Nephilim is and believe me, you guys, here we are talking about Bible movies, and I never thought I would ever be writing Bible stories, because to me, that always felt like the easy thing to do for a religious person, you know, or tell Bible stories. I'm like, we got the Bible, we don't need that. But no, really, you know, but what happened was years ago, I actually, you know, I started looking into these weird Bible passages like Genesis 6 about the Nephilim and the giants and the sons of God mating with human women and all this weird stuff. And I wanted to figure this stuff out, and I explored it, and I discovered this amazing storyline, a theological storyline in the Bible that has to do with the war of the seed, as I call it, which is the Genesis 3:15 says that God's cursing the serpent. He says, your seed will war against the seed of the woman, the seed of the serpent versus the seed of Eve. And of course, that's the messianic hope, right? And so I found this storyline, and it's connected to all these giants that are popping up all over the Bible. So I decided to start telling all those stories in the Bible that touch on giants and or the watchers, these beings that are over the nations. And I'm already up to the 7th. I'm going to have 8 or maybe 9 novels, and it's called Chronicles of the Nephilim. And it's turned out to be really popular. I add some fantasy elements in there in order to show the spiritual warfare that's going on. And I take some creative liberties, some creative license.
No!
But my goal is to...
Yes! No, it doesn't... It's not...
I got to tell you, I've been amazed. I thought I was going to get rejected by a lot of Christians, but really I've had overwhelming positive reception by Christians. Of course, there's going to be some that will say, you didn't follow every nitpicky detail of the Bible, you know, but 95% of them are saying, this is really imaginative. We really enjoy it. I'm seeing the Bible in a new way. It's opening up, you know, just a fresh perspective. And so I'm proud of that, and I'm happy for that as well, because the whole goal is, unlike the Exodus movie and the Noah movie, the whole goal is to glorify God and his grace. And that's what it all comes down to. So yeah, check it out. And you can find out more about it at chroniclesofthenephilim.com. You can find all kinds of cool, free information and pictures and videos and all that kind of stuff at the website.
Great. And Brian also, in these novels, includes appendices with a lot of really rich biblical scholarship. Brian doesn't just sit down with his Bible open and write these stories. He does a lot of research into really good biblical scholarship on these stories and these passages, and so highly recommended.
Brian, thank you again for joining us. We will
Thanks for
have
having
both the links for Brian Mattson's post and Brian Godawa's post in the show notes. So be sure to check those out on the movie Exodus. We'd love to hear your feedback on this episode and any others. If you have questions, we will do our best to answer them if they're not filled with hate. We get a few of those. If they're filled with hate, we will not respond to you. So if you want to ask a legitimate question, ask us in the comments or shoot us an email or send us a note on Facebook or something. We'll do that via YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at DReckoningTV. www.deadreckoning.tv is our website. Brian Godawa, how can people get a hold of you? If they want to find out more stuff, follow you, talk to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I do have a website. I have a movie blog for those who like movies. And I talk about other things too, culture and movies and faith and stuff, but a lot of movies. It's just at Godawa.com, my name, Godawa.com. You can click on the movie blog tab up in the corner. And yeah, you can access that through there. And then other than that, just the Chronicles of the Nephilim website, which has a lot of stuff on it as well.
Awesome. Great. Check it out. And have a Merry Christmas if we don't talk to you before then. I'm Jay Friesen.
I'm Brian Mattson.
And this is Dead Reckoning TV.